हेलो अस्सलाम वालेकुम.
वालेकुम सलाम, क्या हाल चाल है? ठीक
ठीक
ठाक।
ठाक sir, nice seeing you here, and Rafe, Ashik Saab, Ms. Reena. So I think we can start now our ZU dialogue series. My name is Dr. Zulfikar Ali Umrani, and I am the Director for Research, Innovation and Commercialization at Ziauddin University. Uh, so recently we had the COP26 in Glasgow, and there was a disappointment and relief. On one hand, there was treaty remained intact, but on the other hand, the island nations and the developing countries were pretty disappointed. In fact, Greta termed it as blah 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 due to the empty rhetoric. Global climate change is already having an effect on Pakistan, its people, its economy, and the health in the form of increasing frequency of flooding, droughts, low crop yields, irregular weather patterns, less availability of fresh water, and the loss of biodiversity. Uh, in this view, Ziauddin University has dedicated the 10th series of the ZU Dialogues entitled it Global Warming from Climate Change to Climate Crisis to get an opinion of an analysis of the experts about climate change which affects the world and particularly Pakistan and the challenges, especially the risk factors on health issues and what initiatives are needed. Just to tell you a bit more about the ZU series, it's a series of interactive panel discussions, and this is the 10th that was initiated by Mr. Amr Shahzad, who is heading the PR and communications at Ziauddin University and is also the convener of ZU Dialogues. It is a platform where renowned personalities, experts are invited to give their valuable opinions on different aspects of social, political, cultural, and socio-economic topics and things of national and international importance. Thank you, Amir, for giving me this opportunity to host this activity. Now, I would like to just give a brief presentation of our speakers. We have with us Mr.
सही है।
Ashik Ahmed Khan, who is Mr. Ashik Ahmed Khan, who has served the WWF Pakistan as the Director, Conservation and Chief Technical Advisor for about 16 years. Apart from being a member of the IUCN Species Survival Commission, he is a member of the National Nomination Committee for UNESCO's MNB program. And he is the first South Asian winner of the Global Kenton Miller Award 2016. He is a member of the International Steering Committee on Cranes and Wetlands and member of the Global Task Force established for working on beyond the Aichi targets. He's a member also of the, and currently he's a representative of EVK2CNR, an Italian association engaged in research on ecotourism, glaciers, water, climate change, and management plan of protected areas of Pakistan. Then we have a renowned climate activist and lawyer, Mr. Ahmad Rafe Alam. He is a World Yale Fellow and partner at Salim Alam and Company. Alam has served as chairman of the Lahore Waste Management Company and Lahore Electric Supply Company, and he is a member of the Pakistan Climate Change Council and Punjab Environmental Protection Council. He currently serves as senior advisor to Air Quality Asia and is on the board of Hisar Foundation, a think tank on the rational use of water, South Asians for Human Rights, and Lahore Pioneer Foundation. We were lucky to have Mr. Rafe last time with us on the Hisar Foundation's conference on the topic was climate change. Then we have Ms. Reena Said Khan, who is an award-winning freelance journalist based in Islamabad and currently heads the Islamabad Wildlife Management Board as a chairperson. She has received international awards like the International Committee of the Red Cross for journalists on best humanitarian writing. And she has international awards like the International Committee of the Red and Earth Journalism Award in Copenhagen during the UN Summit on Climate Change in 2009. She's co-authored a book called Green Pioneers, published by the UNDP on their most successful environmental projects. And from Ziauddin University, we have our Senior Dean of Faculty of Health Sciences, Professor Dr. Abbas Zafar, and a professor in otolaryngology at Ziauddin University. He has worked in the UK in various capacities and was awarded the Fellowship of Royal College of Surgeons, Glasgow. Professor Abbas returned to Pakistan to pursue a career as ENT surgeon and has held various academic positions. His main interest is head and neck injury. Apart from being deeply involved in medical education, he has various publications to credit both national and international journals. And he will be helping us to understand the health issues. So thank you and welcome to this Ziauddin Dialogue series. So to start the conversation, I would like to move to Mr. Ashik Khan. So, Mr. Ashik, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has termed climate change as a code red for humanity. Could you please tell us what is climate change and what it means for the world? Uh, Mr. Ashik, I think you are muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Great. Climate change is something which is evident in all sphere of life. Now we can't deny it. 10 years ago, this was just a word, and people were reluctant to even believe it. But now we see it, and people see it in different form. It's not only uh, the farmers who have realized this, but almost everyone. Like this year, we are seeing this unusual winter in places where we used to have temperature more than 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we went to minus, and that's something which again being a field man and roaming throughout the country, I have seen many things during the past 3, 4 decades, which I used to see, but I don't see them anymore. And one example I'll give you, like what happened in the past, that this country was rich in natural wetlands. Now we don't have them. There are 70% loss of them. Although some of them are being compensated through the dams and barrages and some other things, but the natural wetlands are basically natural and they are no more there. Each wetland that takes decades really to get established as a complete ecosystem. And most of our dams and barrages are younger than that, and they won't take that charge till another 2, 3 decades. So that's one thing. The second thing is that when I look at the migratory pattern of species, like the species they used to come in the winter, pass through Pakistan, go elsewhere, there is a drastic reduction in the number of these. And some of them have really changed the paths they used to. And they pass through different places now, not the original one and not the historical one. And to me, there's again one thing that indicates that there is something happening with the climate. One good example that has not yet been quoted from Pakistan, and many few people might know about it. There is a place called Misgar in the Hunza, in the upper Hunza. That Mescal has a very good, had a very good kind of pasture. And that pasture was irrigated by the nearby glacier. That glacier has melted down. It has gone far back. And now that 30 square kilometer of the pasture has replaced by another vegetation type. And in the 30 years' time, a vegetation type that was dominated by salix is now dominated by juniper, which is an indicator how the dry the area is. And people used to, if they used to graze 100 animals, now they can't go beyond 50 animals. So these are some of the things that we can see with our own eyes. Uh, but there may be many other that may be happening, but we are not aware of it, or they have already happened, but we don't have any record, or they may shortly happen. So this is when I go to the reasons behind, like when there's not a single factor that is responsible for all this. These are rather multiple factors that are working jointly to impact all this and to escalate the current climate change to the climate risk.
Mm.
And there are so many, but if I have to name a few, let me tell you that loss of biodiversity is the basic one. Then the degradation of the ecosystem is another one. Then not linking the research to management is another reason. Not using the indigenous knowledge is another one. So these are the things, and if I see one factor behind all this, this could be lack of governance. We are very poor in governance, and that governance is causing all these things. So we are much more in number. There's a population issue, but we have and lack of governance is something which we could do, but we couldn't. So maybe I appear in the middle again, but this is something which we are having, and in the middle we will be discussing this further, like we were interested. But I was giving just these few examples that people may see that we had very good walnut growing area in Swat in one place called Miadam. We don't see any walnut now. People have removed them and replaced them by something else. So similarly, in Kashmir, there are something which people are doing just to have kind of adaptation to the problem. So basically, the two things like mitigating the climate change issue or adaptation, these are two different things. But in mitigation, perhaps we can do later. We can't do much on that. But adaptation, that's possible if we really take it serious and we combine the ecosystem restoration with research and indigenous knowledge. If we do that, perhaps we can do something about it. Thank you very much. I will stop here so that others
No,
will get the
thank you,
chance
Ashif
to.
Saab, for presenting particularly the Pakistani perspective of what is happening due to the climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the degradation of the ecosystem, and the factors responsible within Pakistan that what could be done for actually like mitigation, which can't much play a role, but of course adaptation is what needs to be focused. But that brings us to more of a global context, and I like to move to राफे that वो हमारे पास कहते हैं कि करे कोई भरे कोई। तो ग्लोबल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जब हम देखते हैं कि हिस्टोरिकली तो इट्स बीन द इंडस्ट्रियलाइज्ड नेशंस, CO2 इमिशंस, क्लाइमेट चेंज, और उसके जो असरात हैं वो सबसे ज्यादा जो वनरेबल गरीब कौमें हैं, मुल्क हैं, आइलैंड नेशंस हैं, उन पे सबसे ज्यादा होते हैं। तो ये अडेप्टेशन मेजर्स के लिए पैसे जो चाहिए या जो रिपेरेशंस चाहिए, उसके लिए COP26 भी बहुत साइलेंट था और उसमें भी कोई कॉन्क्रीट बात नहीं की गई। उस पे उस टॉपिक को थोड़ा पीछे छोड़ दिया गया। उन्होंने कहा सेंटर बनाए रिपेरेशंस के लिए, कौन भरेगा पैसे? सो व्हाट डू यू थिंक, आई मीन, are we going to see something like this? Who should pay for those disasters, climate disasters? And is it even possible? Can we make them accept this reality?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this important discussion. Let me start by saying that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was signed in 1992, is the major international legal document that regulates how we deal with the challenge of the climate crisis. And it's under the UNFCCC that the Conference of Parties meets every year, as it did in Glasgow. Fundamental to the UNFCCC are several very important principles. One of them is the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, which recognizes that less developed countries have differing obligations towards climate change as compared to more developed countries. And this, in essence, is repeated again and again in the UNFCCC, is a recognition of the historical equity owed by developing nations to less developed nations. It is built into the text of the UNFCCC, these reparations, as it were. And I'll come to that in just a second. But the bad news is that the UNFCCC objectives were to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. It's greenhouse gases, things that we take from the ground to burn for our energy and transport needs, that are responsible for increasing temperatures in the climate crisis. The UNFCCC sought to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions so that there wouldn't be any dangerous anthropomorphic damage to the globe's ecosystem. Unfortunately, since 1992, the global economy has produced more greenhouse gases than it had produced in all of history before 1992. In other words, to think that the UNFCCC is successful in its objective of stabilizing greenhouse gas emissions is a mistake. The UNFCCC has not worked. And holding out any expectation of the Conference of Parties to do anything in these circumstances is putting optimism in front of reality. The truth is that we are now at 420 parts per million carbon concentration in the atmosphere, levels never seen for the last 20 to 25 million years, which is, I should point out, longer than human beings have been on Earth. We are approximately 1 to 1.1 degrees warmer than we were before the Industrial Revolution. And we're already witnessing just this year floods in Europe, forest fires in the United States, heat waves in Canada that killed hundreds of people. We had heat waves in Pakistan. Last year was declared a national emergency on account of the locusts that had come from the Horn of Africa, also due to climate change and unseasonably wet winters. Oceans are acidifying, coral reefs are bleaching. We've seen forest fires in the Arctic for the first time in recorded history. And human beings have plastics in their bodies. And we're only at 1 degree of warming. There is no safe amount of climate change or global warming, none whatsoever, especially when it comes to less developed countries who are extremely vulnerable, mostly because they're poor and don't have the finances to be resilient. I should also point out that it has been quantified that the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of warming, which are the thresholds of the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, are approximately 150 million deaths, mostly in Asian and African cities on account of the air pollution associated with the transport and energy sectors. 150 million people is 4 times the number of soldiers who were killed in World War I and World War II put together. And there is enough carbon in the atmosphere today to lock in a 2-degree temperature increase towards 2060 or 2080. That's certainly some of our lifetimes, certainly and definitely within our children's lifetime. Those Asian and African cities where we're going to see those air pollutions is basically Lahore and Delhi, who are at the epicenter of a global air pollution catastrophe. We here in Lahore, smoggy Lahore, are losing 5 years of our life on account of air pollution, which essentially is a greenhouse gas caused by the transport sector and the energy sector. And so I'll disagree about the fact that Pakistan doesn't need to mitigate. It does need to mitigate, especially when renewable energies are available cheaper than all other types of electricity in Pakistan, especially because Pakistan imports some of the dirtiest sulfur for its diesel and its petrol. We have to mitigate so that we can save our people from the air pollution apocalypse that they are facing. And it's not enough to sit behind the common but differentiated responsibilities of the UNFCCC and say that we're a less developed country and we don't need to do certain. We do need to do these certain things because people are dying as we speak. That said, we've had people and economies using trade and coal and gas for centuries, but we've only got a climate change problem recently. And we have to understand that beyond just greenhouse gases, what are the drivers of climate change? What are the things that we have to address to be able to stop this? It's not enough just to think about mitigation and adaptation or now, because this is inevitable loss and damage. It's important to think of the drivers of the climate crisis and to dismantle them. And may I submit to you that, in my opinion, some of the drivers of the climate crisis are the global, for example, economic system, neoliberal capitalism, number 1. Colonialism, number 2, patriarchy, number 3, consumerism, number 4. It is our global economic system that allows the unaccountable exploitation of natural resources and human capital for the extraction and concentration of wealth and the creation of poverty and inequality. We need to have an international economic system which puts nature in the middle of all transactions so that we can't ignore it. Women need to be part of every decision-making with respect to mitigation and adaptation and loss and damage. And without their voices, we can't have or can't deal with the climate crisis. Colonialism has been nothing but the extraction of natural resources and the abuse of human rights throughout history. And we still see it in the form of this neoliberal agenda that we see globally, with companies investing in less developed countries, exploiting them, taking their resources, often dumping their pollutants and their wastes into countries. We see this happening today, and we have to resist it and dismantle it. As well as consumerism, our own habits, wanting coffee flown in from South America to wake up in the morning when all we have to do is go to sleep 2 hours earlier. But also important to remember that human beings don't consume resources equally. Somebody like myself, who is an environmentalist, still consumes resources at a far greater proportion than someone living in Bhakkar or in Thar or in somewhere in Balochistan. And similarly, we have to understand that a small elite fraction of the global population, 10% of the richest people of the world, consume about 50% of its resources. And we have to target this consumerism, this elite consumerism. It's not the fault of the poor people or the population that's causing the climate crisis. It's the consumptive habits of the global elite. And these 4 drivers we have to address if we have any hope whatsoever to be able to deal with the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very well put. What drives the climate crisis, the 4 factors, and also like the numbers that you presented, 150 million deaths. That's like, an eye opener, and it should be an eye opener for anybody. And when we saw the COVID and the fear of death that was happening over there, we saw a lot of money pouring in, a lot of attention, and still we are giving it that due attention. But we don't see the similar kind of funding coming in regarding climate action and for mitigation and adaptation. So, Ms. Reena, I would like to put to you this question from both as you're an environmentalist and also a journalist. We see in the West a lot of mobilization and awareness about climate change. It's on the agenda. There are mass protests. There are political parties that have the sole mandate even of environment and climate change. But in the countries where it's mostly going to impact, like Rafe said, in Asia and Africa, and we are the most vulnerable. Why we don't see the similar kind of attention? Why isn't climate change on the national agenda in Pakistan? Why is it not the same way presented in the media? So what's your take on this?
Thank you for inviting me. I think actually, to the contrary, I think that it is adequately reported in our media because I'm a media person. So what happened in 2010, we had something called the super floods that hit Pakistan. There was unprecedented rainfall up in the high mountains of Hindu Kush, Himalaya, Karakoram. And of course, the water came rushing down because Pakistan is at an incline from 0 meters to 8,611 meters, which is the top of K2. We have this incline, geographical incline. So the water came down, and there was a lot of flooding, and it was, there was unprecedented rainfall caused this flooding, and it was very well covered, reported on, and the media made the connection that this is because of climate change. This kind of rainfall had never fallen in our high mountains before. And they said, 100-year floods ke baad. And so I think at that stage, I think that was a turning point for the media, the connection between climate change and these extreme, what we call extreme weather events. बहुत ज़्यादा coverage शुरू हो गई, and and now I think climate change is on the front page of our newspapers. Pehle it used to be a backstory somewhere, but it's affecting our economy, it's affecting our mangoes, it's affecting our quinoa crop, it's affecting our economy, it's affecting our health. There's dengue now. I mean, a huge dengue outbreak in Lahore and Islamabad as well. Unseasonably long, and wet. We had a summer that abhi jaake sardi hui hai. So, I mean, there was dengue in November, which is unheard of. The mosquitoes were still buzzing around, and so it's affecting our health now. So I think it's people are aware in Pakistan. They're making the connection, especially young people. They're, I think, now learning about it in schools. You mean in terms of like coming out on the streets? We even Rafi's, I don't know if he's still online, but Rafi and organized a very good climate protest last year. Even this year, there was one smaller because of COVID. Actually, I think it was pre-COVID when we had the big marches. And we, for the first time, we mobilized students, we mobilized citizens, we mobilized even transgenders and people from like, NGOs. And we marched in Islamabad, Lahore, in Karachi. I helped organize the one in Islamabad. But then, COVID struck. And this is something that's even I was reading about it by this really famous columnist, George Monbiot, and he wrote that, even in the West, the students' Fridays for Future, which is led by Greta Thunberg, she has inspired all the youth all over the world, and especially in the European countries, because you see, after all, it's the European countries, it's the USA, it's countries like Canada, like Japan, the industrialized countries that caused climate change in the first place, right? Because they industrialized before we did, and it's their emissions that have now caused this huge problem. And so they are obviously part of the problem, and they're also part of the solution, because tomorrow, if Pakistan stops all carbon emissions, we stop all the cars running on the roads, we shut down our power plants, we shut down our coal plants, we stop even our planes and all that, even then it will not even make a dent in the global emissions. But of course, Rafe is right. We need to clean up our own emissions for our own people, our citizens, especially in Lahore and in the cities in Peshawar and Karachi, with air pollution is such a big. Even in Islamabad, Islamabad is not really clean air. I mean, we think it is because it's better than the other three, but it's a growing problem because there are more and more cars on the road. And there was a study done by the FAO in Lahore, and that study attributes more than 40% of the emissions in Punjab, especially in Lahore area, due to vehicular emissions. So it's the cars actually, and we saw that during the pandemic when there was a lockdown for I think a couple of weeks, the air suddenly became blue, and you could see, the air was clean, you could see the blue skies in Lahore, and it's because all the cars are parked at home. And there was hardly any flights and all that. And so, and then the factories are also, I think, closed for a little while. The workers were at home. So we had a very short lockdown, but you could see it all over the world. You saw it all over the world. Suddenly the city, the air is cleaner. There were wildlife coming into the cities. And the governments in the West spent trillions of dollars supporting their citizens, because their economies literally shut down because of the fear of COVID, because we didn't have the vaccines then and didn't know how many people were going to die. And so people will do it to protect their health. And so it's surprising that, for climate change, which is going to, at least, I was telling someone that you're lucky that you're sitting in your house right now. Lockdown is bad, but you're comfortable, you're sitting in your house. And when climate change hits, you're not even going to have a house. And that's what's happening. When there's a flood, your house is gone. It's been the massive, like in Canada recently, people actually just lost their homes because the floods were so bad, they swept away the homes and all their belongings. And now they're climate refugees in their own country. And same with the tornadoes that are now hitting the US. Entire houses are being blown away. So I was like, this is just a taste of what's going to come. For us, who environmentalists and experts and scientists who are now, we've been following climate change for a few years. Whatever the scientists said would happen is happening. And we're only at, as Rafi said, 1.0, 1.1 degree of warming. And the world has decided in Paris, during the Paris COP, the Paris summit was in 2015, that we will try to control global warming to 2 degrees, pursuing 1.5, because the small island states said, but we will not survive 2 degrees of warming. We will actually, the sea level rise will flood us, and our cultures will be destroyed, our islands will disappear under the sea. So they begged in African countries. And there's a massive drought in Kenya right now. So it's already hitting the African continent very badly. And Uganda as well. And so they insisted, and because of that, the world then decided to use the word pursue 1.5. And Glasgow, the whole, the theme, or the whole, the core principle of the Glasgow Climate Pact was that we must keep 1.5 alive. So that is now internationally recognized by all the global community, that this is a goal that we really need to. We should not go beyond 1.5. We should stay. And I think Glasgow, it was a failure in many ways, but at the same time, countries did agree to keep 1.5 alive. So that's very important. And they said they will come back next year. They will do their homework. Right now, the homework is the nationally determined contributions document. Even Pakistan has submitted theirs. So 200 countries of the world have submitted their NDCs. And they said they will come back next year and try to raise their ambition, try to cut more and more emissions. And I know that it's a slow, a painful process. The UNFCCC doesn't produce results overnight. But what's the alternative? We have no alternative to the UNFCCC. Just short of a revolution, which I would Yes, we can demand a revolution, come out on the streets, but there is no actual alternative system or way of getting all the countries to come together, except for it's the only game in town. And if you count all the NDCs and you do the figures, which this group called Climate Action Tracker, they've done this calculation. All the past pledges, the current pledges during the COP, and they found that the world is still on track to 2.4 degrees of warming. So it's still overshooting. But then imagine if there was no UNFCCC process, we would be heading towards 4 or 5 degrees. So certain catastrophe, even 2.4 is too much, but at least we're bending the curves somewhat, and now we need to put more pressure. We need to pressurize, the Western governments, our own government as well, I have to say. We need the people, the citizens of the world need to put on the pressure, the young people, who are very rightly so demanding a greater ambition or more action, because they say that we don't have a future. What kind of world are we going to grow up to? All the old people in the negotiating rooms, and where we're old now, and they're in their sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're not. It's the people now, the kids who are in their teens, who are growing up. We're making decisions for their future, and their future is not looking promising at all. So we've enjoyed a pretty reasonably okay sort of world, and we'll be gone soon. And what kind of earth are they going to? Earth will be fine. It's like, what kind of civilization will they inherit? So I think, I have reason for optimism. I go to the COPs every year, and even this year, the private sector was involved. So now businesses are really, really, they also, businessmen also have children. They also have grandchildren. Everybody realizes there is a huge problem, but then how do you bend the curve? How do you get there? I think that haggling over here, negotiations, everybody is looking out for themselves. Every country wants the best deal for their own selves, like Saudi Arabia, constantly trying to slow down. They know that the fossil fuel era is coming to an end, but they're trying to slow it down as much as possible, because they are totally dependent on fossil fuels right now. So
And
they
then we
want to buy
also,
down.
from your point, then we also saw how China and India,
Yes,
what they did with the
because
coal commitment.
yeah, and they say that the West is already polluted. They've done,
Mm.
and now they're rich enough to switch to renewables. And now when it comes to developing countries' turn, so there is also that inequities, climate inequity we call it, and those issues going. But I think there is no one at the COP who does not realize the gravity of the issue. From the scientists to the politicians. But then it's, how do you get there? So I really believe that next year, the next COP will be in Egypt. It's going to be in the global South. And also, we've come out of where the pandemic is still raging. We still have Omicron, but the pandemic seems to be, now we have vaccines. It'll probably wind up. Bill Gates says that it's winding down by next year. So I'm hoping that next year, people will come to the COP, or the countries will come, the delegations will come with much more determination, with much more ambition. And then also, I think the wariness of the COVID will be sort of, this in Glasgow, everybody looked tired. People were just exhausted. So, and people are hurt. They lost jobs. The economies are hurting. So it was just unfortunate.
Reena, just taking from your point, also, like COVID, one of the indirect causes is again the way we are using our resources, cutting down forest, and climate change is an indirect contributor. And you also mentioned about the health, the dengue and other diseases which are coming up. Rafe also mentioned smog, and you too, and Ashik was also talking about health. So this brings us to the question on health. So moving to Dr. Abbas Zafar. Uh, Dr. Abbas, according to the WHO, climate change has been presented as the greatest threat to the human health. So, as our other panelists have also been talking about the health risk due to the climate change, what's your take on it? How do you see the threats, the health threats posed by climate change, and how they will evolve further?
I think this is a very major topic and subject, to look at the effects of climate change on the health of the population. As we all agreed that the people who are making the problems, they are the wealthy and rich states in the world. The people who are the sufferers, they belong to the poor countries, especially in Southeast Asia, and we are one of the major sufferers of the climate change. And health is a major issue. If you look at COVID and the type of health care provision in this part of the world, we just had a peak of not is so much less than our neighboring countries, and that exposed our poor healthcare delivery system, and we were really exhausted. So, can you believe that according to one of the WHO statements, and they predict that between 2030 and 2050, climate change per se is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. And that is a direct effect of climate change. So, this is the kind of volumes we are looking at in years to come. And at present itself, the effect of climate change on health is really, I think, something I think which is there in Pakistan, but not a lot of people talk about it. I think the people talk about the smog of Lahore. People talk about the effect of the worst floods we had. But if we look at the health effects of disruptions of physical, biological, and ecological systems, what are its impact on health? So we divide that health effects into temperature-related illnesses and death, which are huge, extreme weather-related health issues, air pollution-related health issues, water and food-borne diseases, then vector-borne and rodent-borne diseases, effects of food and water shortages, and the effect of popular displacement due to these disasters. And one of the major things we fail to recognize is the mental state or the mental stress we have due to climate changes. And I think that is one of the area people don't even talk about it. And it's such a huge area to look at the effects of mental impact on health related issues due to climate change. So first of all, if we take the temperature, I think the direct impacts of health from heat. The human body maintains body temperatures in ambient temperatures not exceeding 32 degrees centigrade. Above this temperature, we lose heat from the skin and we sweat. And heat related illness occurs when the body is unable to adequately cool. So the minimum ambient temperatures are also important. Difficulties cooling when the minimum temperature is greater than 22 degrees. So high humidity reduces effectiveness of sweating and increasing the risk of heat-related illnesses at any given temperature. And its direct effect of temperature can be heat cramps, which are muscular pains and spasm, heat exhaustion, which causes body fluids to lose water through heavy sweating. And in the end, we all talk about heat stroke, which struck us a few years back. And all of a sudden, and all of us talked about heat stroke. And till since then, we do get warnings of heat stroke, but still we have not prepared ourselves yet. What will be done if we are struck with heat stroke? And the indirect impacts of heat and temperature changes can be range of areas that can potentially be affected with gradual and extreme temperature increases, includes impacts on ecosystems, water, food, disease-carrying vectors, lifestyle, and community resilience. The most important people are aware of is the problems with the respiratory system, the
Yes.
air we breathe, and what happens when we have the air quality index when it gets bad. Air pollution is everywhere. I think every major city in Pakistan has problems with air. Maybe it due to pollens in Islamabad. Look at Karachi. The quality of air nobody talks about in Karachi. It's so bad. Smog, the worst, second worst, sometimes becomes the worst. Delhi and Lahore, we all talk about the smog. Even nowadays, we have problem with smog. So, according to the Center for Disease of Control, air pollution increases the risk of many pre-existing conditions, including diabetes, which is very, very common in Pakistan, lung disease, asthma, heart disease, and even cancer. And as somebody said, that on average, a Pakistani's life is reduced by 2 years due to impact of pollution. But a person residing in Lahore, his life is reduced by 5 years. Can you just
Yes.
imagine somebody living in Lahore, the city of gardens, the city of development, the city now of industries, and people love. I mean, when we were growing up, I think it was Karachi when most of the people would like to come. Now everybody is going to Lahore, even
Yes.
from this part of Karachi, a lot of people. But look, the life expectancy of a person living in Lahore is reduced by 5 years. You see, when you are ill, when you are sick, when you are terminally sick, you beg of a day extra to survive. And can you believe you just lose 5 years of life just because if you are living in Lahore? So now come to the climate changes because of the air quality. So air quality has a major role in the development of transport, dispersion, and deposition of air pollutants. And air pollutants episodes are often associated with stationary or slow moving air masses. So the effect of air pollutions, the ozone is rising, can affect and give rise to pneumonia, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, asthma, allergic rhinitis, which is because of the allergens going through your nose and through your airway passages, and also premature mortality. People talk of premature mortality in areas where there is the air quality is poor. Particulate matter known to affect morbidity and mortality, and toxic gases and particulate matter from fires, which somebody talked of, bush fires, the forest fires, also cause acute and chronic respiratory illnesses. And that is evidence when there was a huge fire in Indonesia in 1997.
Mhm.
And the wind blown dust, respiratory particles, trace elements from desert region can affect population in remote areas. So it's not only the forest, when the air disperses, that contains particulate matter and it can affect this far away areas from the forests themselves. So therefore, next come the storms and floods. We all are susceptible. This region is susceptible from floods because of the climate changes. We have storm. So these South Asian countries are the topmost 10 countries in the world where there are more storms and uh, floods. And the health impact from floods can be immediate deaths and injuries, which is very common
Mhm.
when we non-specific increases in mortality. Infectious disease prevail whenever there is floods, and that can be hepatitis, diarrheal diseases, respiratory, and vector-borne diseases like malaria or some just talked about the dengue. And then exposure to toxic substances, mental health issues, and increased demands of health system. So already our health systems are poor.
Yes.
Whenever you have floods, and there are increased demand on our healthcare systems. So that is something to be talked about.
No, thank you,
And
Dr. Abbas. Sorry, please.
yeah, you want me to continue? Or the time
Uh,
is over. You want to wind it up?
Actually, I mean, I would love to continue and join you later on also because so
Yeah, sure.
interesting and the issue is so grave. The health impact is so huge that it is something that needs to be considered right now. The human cost of it. But now we have some questions that we wanted to put to the audience. Uh,
Sure.
So this is an open question for all the panelists. We have talked about the impacts of climate change, the grave situation that it presents, and what is at stake. This is more about a solution thing. So the question is, Pakistan seems one of the most vulnerable to climate change. What measures should the government and we as a society need to take now? So it's an open question to all the panelists. It's into two parts: what the government needs to do, and what we can do as a society.
Okay, I'll just take one because I belong to an educational institution. I think I think most of the learned speakers have talked in detail the overall conditions in Pakistan and talked about the interest shown by the government up till now. We
Mhm.
talked about the role of the media, which is very important. But the most important thing to me, as somebody was talking about Greta Thunberg, I think it is the young generation in Pakistan which needs to be motivated, because if we leave things what is present in Pakistan for them to grow and become older, they are the worst, they will be the worst sufferers at that time. And I think at university level, school level, college level, I think this thing of water scarcity, this thing of climate changes,
Mm.
what would be the effect of climate changes, what will happen to your health, how you can, uh, I think, prevent it. I think we must start educating right from the primary to secondary to university level so that they know what is happening, and
Yes.
they should be the torch bearers in the society to bring about a change apart from whatever is the government is doing.
Yes, excellent. So we need to educate our youth, make them aware, and an important role could also be played by the universities for the teaching, the research on climate change. Mr. Ashik, we move to you now for your response to this question of what the government and society especially needs to do now.
Yeah, well, I personally feel that we have two drawbacks, but there's rather significant one. एक तो ये कि हमारे इंस्टीट्यूशंस जो है तो दे आर वीक. अभी डॉक्टर राफे बात कर रहे थे कि 3 साल में इनकी काउंसिल मीट ना कर सकी. अब ये तो एक छोटा सा इंस्टीट्यूशन है ना, लेकिन कुछ वो इंस्टीट्यूशन जो बड़े बड़े हैं और काफी जमाने से पड़े हैं, उनका भी यही हाल.
Yes.
Once the institutions are weak and the education system is not to the mark. इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में कुछ वक्त ऐसा गुजरा जो 4 से 5 हजार PhD हर साल निकलते थे. I sat on the selection board of a university और मुझे वास्ता पड़ता रहता था to see these people coming and going. हाँ जी. अच्छा. I have yet to see a PhD scholar who has worked on a management issue. सारे के सारे इधर उधर लगे हुए हैं. जब तक वो चीज नहीं होगी कि आप टारगेट करें अपने रिसर्च को किसी प्रॉब्लम के ऊपर और इंस्टीट्यूशन आपके इतने स्ट्रांग हो को टू टेक अप दैट. अभी डॉक्टर राफे बड़े अच्छी बात कर रहे थे कि मिटिगेशन के हवाले से हम बहुत कुछ कर सकते. यस, वी कैन डू अलॉट, लेकिन अगर आपकी इंस्टीट्यूशन जिस हालत में पड़े हैं उसमें तो वी कांट मूव अहेड. तो मेरे नजदीक सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि वी हैव टू इम्प्रूव आवर एजुकेशन सिस्टम. We have really to make sure that the PhDs are working on management issues rather than the issues which they can easily handle और डिग्री लेकर तो बैठ जाते हैं. And two, we have to find the weaknesses of the institutions and try to remove them. और एक और चीज, हमारे कुछ मसाइल जो है ना ये वेस्टेज की वजह से सामने आ रहे हैं. We are wasting the resources. One of my studies was on the forest resources, and I realized that in some of our productive forests, 30% of the forest that's going west in wasteful consumption की वजह से, और कोई चीज नहीं. तो if you are or wasteful consumption को रोकने के लिए your religion is far stronger than many other religions. उसने तो मना किया है कि you can't waste even a drop of water. वो कहते हैं खाओ पियो बट डोंट वेस्ट द थिंग्स. इसे जाया ना करो. और साथ में कहते हैं कि जो जाया करते हैं वो शैतान के भाई. वेयर आर आवर रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूशंस? So these are the things
नहीं,
which
you are absolutely
we
right,
must
Ashik
address.
साहब. You are absolutely right. हमारे इदारों की वीकनेस और हमारी रिसर्च भी नहीं हो रही उस लेवल पे जो होनी चाहिए, उसकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन भी नहीं हो रही, अगर कुछ है भी तो
वो
तो
है नहीं तो क्या
और
इम्प्लीमेंटेशन.
और फिर रिसोर्सेज जो वेस्ट हो रहे हैं, द वेस्टेज इज अ क्रिटिकल इशू. मिस रीना, वुड यू लाइक टू रिस्पॉन्ड आल्सो?
I just wanted to add that, at the COP, the most work that, जो आते हैं delegations, we also have the presence of cities and states. This is USA में जब Trump था, and he was totally a climate denier, and he did not stop all this legislation on climate change. तो वहाँ पे states like California, they went ahead, and they went ahead with their renewables, they went ahead with their climate mitigation, with their adaptation. So I think it's really a localized, like agar Lahore mein smog ka issue hai, then it's really the work of Lahore ke citizens, Lahore ke courts, Lahore ka jo mayor hai. I don't know if there's a mayor right now. I don't know exactly local bodies ka kya situation hai wahan par, but wahan it's a Punjab government ka. I think at the federal level, the my delegation, they did the maximum that a delegation could have done.
Thank you.
We're not Bangladesh, but their delegation was they've been very engaged with the whole process.
नहीं, राइना, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. कि अगर
Sorry. After the 18th Amendment, it's really, I really think jahan climate बहुत ज़्यादा severe emergency, like the smog is a climate emergency as well. वहाँ you need to see action on the ground, right at the grassroots level. Instead of waiting top down के हुकूमत करेगी और government करेगी और minister साहब आएंगे. I think we should stop waiting
हम
for
खुद
that.
कुछ करें, हमारे लोग, हमारे शहर, हमारे गांव खुद कुछ
build
करें.
alliances. This is what happened in Delhi. The people of Delhi got together. They petitioned the courts. They got together. They really moved on it. They made the NGOs got involved. So I really think it needs to be a localized.
I think it's an excellent input, and हम अपनी solutions में इसको रखेंगे जरूर. Now our time is actually up. I would like to thank all our panelists. सारे हम environmentalists तो हैं, लेकिन मुझे बड़ी खुशी हुई कि हमारे पास development sector से, हमारे पास legal fraternity से, हमारे पास journalists से और higher education से, we had a wonderful mix of experts here. Thank you so much for this discussion on climate change, and especially where we had the last part on the solutions. So hopefully we can put some of these solutions to the people who are concerned, और कुछ उस पे आवाज उठाएं, कुछ करें. So again, thank you very much for your time, और इंशाल्लाह कुछ ना कुछ climate change पे हम करेंगे. Thank you.
Thanks for organizing this. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And Reena Salam.
Also, I would like to thank Mr. Amir Shahzad for organizing this ZU Dialogue series. I wish him well for bringing all these pressing issues to us. And we hope to have you at Ziauddin University. Thank you.